Maylands Historical and Peninsula Association are proud to be sponsored by some of our local businesses. NTY, our established local real estate agent. Rufo's, for great coffee and great pizzas. Esteban's, offering you hairdressing excellence. Clinicare, for all your pharmacy needs. Rubble Books and Games, a family-run bookstore. Lyric Lane, for good food, drink and music. Mastengo, suppliers of non-preservative wine. Maylands Park Shopping Centre, offering you mall-style shopping in Maylands. These local businesses support us. We think they deserve your support.
7 years ago I got involved with the Bayswater Historical Society after living in Bayswater pretty much all of my life, and then met Roger Tomlins, who was the president of Maylands Historical and Peninsula Association, and he said, "Oh, why don't you come down to the old police station and see what we're doing there?" And so met John McLennan and talked to Roger, and over a number of months heard the story. And well, we've got this room at the Old Peninsula Hotel where Dome's located these days. Why don't you come down and have a look? So came and had a look at the parlour at the front, which our association has the rights to use on a peppercorn rental basis from the city of Bayswater. And sort of from there it garnered for me this interest in how on earth did a brewery give a grand old building like this to a group who were complaining about them going to demolish it. And it just amazed me that, wow, you know, over a period of 4 or 5 years, that is what happened. The Swan Brewery did gift it to the community in the old Peninsula Association Incorporated. Fortunately for me, I really don't know much about the topic except what I've been exposed to, read and what have you, but publishing tonight's talk drew out of the woodwork a few people who said, "Oh, you need to talk to David Blair and you need to talk to Paul Bridges," and so we've had some conversations, and I've got a couple of support people here going to give their experience during their time on the committees and supporting that campaign to save the building for the future, so it's here today. So we've got some slides showing a variety of things, but really for me tonight's about starting a new conversation, stimulating a conversation and saying, hey, it was preserved by the community for the community. How do we best record that story? Because there's information all over the place. We, in the society, have lots of information, but it's not actually collated anywhere, or that I know of. Maybe somebody's got it. There's a few bits of memorabilia on the table. It came from Pam Gunn, also emailed in and contacted me, and I spoke to her, and that's how I then made contact with David. So this bit of memorabilia here comes from Paul Bridges, who's now the president of the Bassendean Historical Society. So I'm going to hand over and get Paul to talk about his experience living in 7th Avenue and being part of the group that kicked off the campaign to save this building from just becoming a pile of rubble. So I'll hand over to Paul, who's got some amazing originals with him.
Just hold those for me, please. All right. Thanks, Terry. Okay, back in the mid-70s, I lived in 114 7th Avenue, and that was a group house. There were 5 bedrooms, and it was students and workers that lived in there. Most of us were ideological Communist Party of Australia members, and we had quite a bit of experience in campaigning, campaign against nuclear energy, campaign to save native forests, campaign against foreign military bases were all going on at that time. And we had a friend called Frank Parks who lived a couple of blocks away, and he was a carpenter builder, and he came and visited us one night with a newspaper clipping out of the Daily News that said the Swan Brewery was going to demolish 3 hotels: Peninsula Hotel, the Broken Hill Hotel, and another one that I can't recall. Anyway, Frank said, we've got to do something about this, and so some inquiries were made, and what we found out was that the Swan Brewery had put an application in to build the tavern alongside, and one of the conditions of the approval was that when it was built, they had to demolish this hotel to satisfy the parking requirements. Now, we thought that was totally ridiculous, and so we started a campaign. And because we had the campaigning skills and the mechanism to campaign with leaflets and bumper stickers and posters, and one of our people was a woman called Val Humphrey, who later became my wife, and we're still good mates, and this is where the materials have come from. So she did the design of the posters and the hotel, which I see is reproduced on a bit of stuff. So where's that poster that I gave you? So this was the one of the first, and this is the old screen printing method where you have your screen and your ink and away you go. So she did the design, and this was for a public meeting in 1976 at the Maylands Town Hall. Now, my recollection of that was Duncan Cameron chaired the meeting. That'll be right, my phone's gone off. Sorry, I'll do that. Cannot talk right now. Let's get rid of her. So Duncan chaired the meeting, and my recollection was that a committee was formed out of that to do negotiations with the Swan Brewery. Anyway, so the committee was formed. Someone called Mike McGaw was involved in that, and then the next thing we knew that there was an auction, and the fittings and fixtures and furniture in the building was being sold. So some of our people came along to that and bought things like the carpet running up the stairs, not to take away but to leave there because we hoped we'd win the campaign. Anyway, then there was the site was fenced off, and demolition contractors had been employed, and I was part of a picket line that stood at the back of the building because that's where the trucks came in, and we held firm. And anyway, the guys got out, and there was a bit of toing and froing or discussion amongst them. There was no argy-bargy, and then possibly a union organiser came along and had a talk to them, and they all packed up and went away. So I was in my work overalls and I went off to work. Now, what happened that I think won the campaign is that the research that was done found that the Swan Brewery also owned the two houses adjacent to the site. So we said, come on you guys, pull one of the houses or two of the houses down but leave the pub. Anyway, I don't know how it all got resolved, but we won the day. And the thing that we did after winning the campaign was to do what everybody did in the 1970s and plant a native garden out the front with lots of gum trees, which over the years grew really, really tall and quite appropriately were ripped out and a more appropriate garden put in. That's about all I can tell you of my involvement in the campaign. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Great to get those insights into the antics of what went on, and it's fascinating. There's hundreds of press clippings and cuttings that we've got in our files. These are just a couple of things that have popped up. Hotel built in 1906 by Gustav Lieb. He was a graduate from the Vienna Technical School of Building and migrated to Australia in 1891. And here's the damage that was found. And when I talked to David Blair, he talked about, the damage that we found once we got behind the fence that the demolition had done. And here's a few photos showing that before I get David to come and reminisce and give his background. The surrounds around the fireplaces had all been pulled off and were leaning against walls. The state of the roof. And the smoke in the old bar, damaging the ceiling. Them were the days, weren't they? Now this room here, beyond this wall used to go through here. This was the old smokers' room back in its day. And here's the toilets. So 80s, they've been a bit of a time warp, but John's found out tonight that the toilets are being upgraded. So there's some change happening to those toilets at long last, because yes, they didn't quite look like that in recent times, but they have been fairly old. So New Tavern, 1976. I wasn't really that aware of what was going on here because I'd just got married in May '76 and lived in Dwellingup for a couple of years and then came back, and whilst I was living on Grand Promenade, didn't really get involved in the campaign or know really what was going on. We had young children and busy and what have you, but it was funny, I'd had this email suggesting I talk to David, and the clipping out of the Daily News I was looking at quoted him and says, David Blair said, should a historic and functional building come down to accommodate 31 phantom cars? So it was like, he's the man we need to get along and talk about from his perspective. So, so I'll get David to come up and give his stories and connect with you all. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Terry. And it's wonderful to be back here 48 years after all that excitement. I had, so the years that you were like the year of that meeting was the year I had come back to Perth from, I'd been working in America, and I had a baby, there was a baby on the way, but my sister was involved with that first group that had been around at the time of the, when everything was sold off and things. Yeah. So Paul, and you might know her or have known her, Margaret Jeffrey.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And so she kept sort of trying to get me to come along, and I was preoccupied with sort of family things, and but gradually she got me to come and do more and more. And the time I got really fired up was when the demolition team had come in, and the photos, which has brought back vivid memories just now of that staircase. We came in and found all this incredible mess. We had to climb over the fence to get in, and the demolishers had been stopped. A very important part of it had been that we had a really good contact in the Daily News, and a guy called Jim Magnus, who actually lives just down the road from me, and he was a regular journalist there, and they would do stories almost whenever we wanted them. So at probably around the end of '76 and '77 was about the time I think that the demolishers came in, and that was the time I started to get involved. And one of the first things I remember was having climbed over the fence, found all these fireplaces and things, mantelpieces leaning against the wall, and I vividly remember putting that one back, and we just pushed it back in to where it had been ripped out, and amazingly it fitted quite well, and it didn't just fall out again, it really stayed there. And so then we went around everywhere, and we took all the bits of the balustrade and very carefully put them to one side so that we could, in the future, we could get it fixed. So there was a whole lot of direct action going on. But at the same time, we were meeting with all sorts of people, and we were sending submissions after submission after submission to the Stirling City Council, and we had a lot of dealings with Alma Venville. There's the Alma Venville Centre down there. She was the mayor, and she said, "That building's an eyesore. Why do you care about that? Why don't you help save the Albany Bell Hatchery?" And she kept saying to us, "Albany Bell Hatchery, just forget about that and don't waste your time on it." And we carried on stories, and then Pam was here. So I don't know if everybody knows Pam Gunn, who's been a long time resident of Maylands. From when?
From then, 1976.
Was it? Yeah.
Just moved here, we dragged me into it.
And my wife at the time ran the International Folk Dance Group. And so and Pam, I see, brought some photos from the folk dance group. And I remember one time we staged a photo. I had to go up this dangerous staircase, get out on the veranda, and then we had the folk dancers dancing on the veranda when the Daily News came and took a photo, and I think we got that on TV. So basically, about once a month, we managed another story, and along with that, there were submissions. The submissions were knocked back, and they refused to do anything. And then there was probably 1, 2, I can't remember, it seemed like an endless period of time. Must have been at least 2 years. There was just this stalemate, and there was no more demolition going on. We eventually managed to get permission and get a key so that we could actually get through the fence, or for the padlock, and we get in the fence, and we managed to do more fixing up here, but only a certain amount of the fixing up. And we asked the Stirling City Council for a grant and to repair all the damage, and there was a proposal that they should give us $25,000 for that purpose, but this never eventuated. And the problem was that they were still sticking to this rule of, that they wanted the extra parking for 31 cars. We had people coming in, and we were counting how many cars were in the car park, and there were, always about 50 or 100 empty spaces, even on the most crowded days, and but still they wouldn't listen to us. But the main thing we did is we just persisted, and I'm a pretty persistent person. So there was another person who was involved, which was Paul Roberts, and I think about the first year of that, he and I made a really good team. And I remember him coming, and we're having meetings with people, trying to get them to change their minds. But the problem was always the Swan Brewery refused to do anything about it. They said, no, this is, they have this order to provide those spaces, and every time we tried to meet with them, they were relatively cordial and relatively polite. And at the time, I was doing physics research, as I've spent most of my life doing, and at the UWA physics department, and we needed various stainless steel containers. And I had a meeting with the managing director of the Swan Brewery down in the old Swan Brewery building, and there was places where all these barrels came out. And I saw this big stainless steel barrel, and I said, we just need something like that for our research. And he said, and we just had this tense meeting, and then he was taking me out, and I said, we need one of these. And he said, well, I could get you one of those. Would you like it? And then he phoned me, a couple of days later, and said, come and collect your Swan Brewery barrel. And what he had done is to get these barrels all said property of the Swan Brewery Company on it, and he'd got a welder to weld out the property of, and said, this is for you. So there was something, we developed a rapport, and yet we were still total opponents, and we were still saying bad things about each other in the media and things like that. But then I think it was 1978, late 78, but it could have been 79. Mm-hmm. 79. And I got this phone call just before Christmas from him. And he said, we have a Christmas present for you. And he said, you can have the Peninsula Hotel. It's yours for the Peninsula Association. It was unbelievable that they should do it, but then after that we managed to get the 25,000. Pam, you can probably tell me all the things I'm saying a bit wrong. You can, because you were at the time that lots of things were happening. We were coming in and trying to clean the place up. There was a gigantic freezer thing, that pubs had to keep all the drinks in. An ancient piece of hardware, refrigeration hardware, and we decided we were going to get this out because it was just down there somewhere, just through that door. And it took up lots and lots of space, and it was not suitable for what we needed here, and I remember getting this thing out ourselves, and I think we had a hacksaw or something to cut through a piece of pipe, and suddenly all this terrible noxious gas came out, and we were all almost completely asphyxiated by sulfur dioxide. And but I had a trailer and I took it away, and it's still at my house. But a couple of years ago, I thought I had almost convinced my son Lyndon, who lives not far from here, to take it. So seeing you live so close, it would be a very nice thing for you to have in your backyard as a memory of the Peninsula Hotel. So then what happened was we had this little bit of money, and we managed to get some restoration done, and we got the fence down. And my chookrun at Guildford has still got the fences of the old chain link fence that was here, because it was easier just for people to take these things away and who were able to use them. So because we had to do everything on our own, and we had these working bees here, and I remember, and I know there's a photo somewhere around of me on the top of a very long ladder, painting up just underneath the dome of the, so we had all these groups. We got paint donated, and we did all this painting and things like that, and fixing it up. Sorry? Oh.
Sue and I painted those.
Yeah. And so another person was Sue Hall, who was involved. I think she was the first caretaker here. And what I remember is that beautiful set of red velvet curtains that she made. Hmm? They've gone. They've been replaced by something not nearly as beautiful. But so I think I've probably told you enough stories from that time, except perhaps just to remind you then of who the first tenants were, because we always had the idea that we were going to make this a community centre of community groups. And the folk dancing group made this its headquarters, and there was folk dancing every Monday night in here. And there was the Colonial Bottle Society of Western Australia, and they collected old bottles, and there were some wonderful exhibitions in here of the old bottles. I don't know if there's much record of that. There's the West Australian National Parks Association that had an office just upstairs there, and I've been to some national parks where I've seen signs where they have done some improvement in some national parks. And then there was Len Zooks, the artist, who has became a very successful artist and sculptor. He was there. Any other things I should add, Pam, or should I stop there? I'm sure I've talked enough. Oh, and the T-shirt. And I did want to bring you one. This is a brand new, unworn T-shirt. Wow. And if anybody was willing to frame it and have it leave it hung here as a memory, I'd be happy to donate it to your group.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Yes, fascinating stories, isn't it? And yes, those community groups, there's about 15 of a little publication that was done in 96 that talks about 1906 to 1996. And on the back of that it lists the tenants at the time, and a number of these are those early tenants that were there back in the early days. The Burmese Association of WA, the Colonial Bottle and Collectors Club, and this is just cycling through what repairs have been done and giving you pictures of those. Maylands Historical Society used to be here as well in 96. The WA Society of the Arts, the WA Folk Federation, Weight Watchers Incorporated, Vietnam Vets Association of WA branch were here, The WA National Parks were still here in '96, so they were a long-term tenant. Isn't that a beauty? So '96. Triumph Car Club, Vauxhall Owners Club, the Austin 7 Car Club, Maylands Weight Watchers, WA Card Collectors Club, and the Maylands Yoga Group, as well as the Local Government Planners Association. So, and then we come to this. I was fortunate recently to meet Daphne Milborough, who's in the second row there on the end up there, and she was one of the caretakers with her late husband Bertie, and she describes her time here as absolutely fabulous time in our lives. So it was fascinating sitting down and talking to Daphne recently about being part of the fabric of this building and wandering the corridors, supporting all of the groups, you know, putting out the urns, setting up the teacups, those sort of things for the different groups that use the building. Not one of her tasks really, but was one of those things that Daphne loved to do, was to make it easy for the groups coming in and using the ballroom and dining room and what have you. So yes, there they are back in the day when they were living here out the back. Daphne loved to garden, so had lots of pots and plants and some hanging baskets out the back of the hotel. 7-day-a-week commitment. During the week, of course, you couldn't do those noisy things like polishing floors, and Daphne said to me tonight, "Oh my good Terry, look at this floor," you know. And yes, it's a sad state, and there's a bit of an indication of what it used to look like back in Daphne's day, where it was polished beautifully, and hopefully one day it'll come back to that sort of state. So what were they responsible for? Cleaning, security, opening and closing for groups, and much more. Whatever happened was on their watch because they were here 24/7. Cleaning products allowance, that was a good one. $25 and so many cents a month was the allowance from Daphne's memory of what they had to buy cleaning products and stuff with. She always said good night to Gus because it was like, oh, there's that presence, you know, so is Gus still here? And there is this presence. Maybe there is a ghost, who knows? There was a wedding magazine shoot here, and Daphne says, oh, I wish we still had one of their magazines that they produce. So they brought in all of these bridal gowns and modelled them and photographed them here on the beautiful stairs and the beautifully polished floorboards. And yes, it would be lovely to track down that magazine if it was possible, but who knows. So this is upstairs. At the top of the stairs there were 4 rooms at the back: kitchen, lounge and a couple of bedrooms, and then which was home for Daphne and her husband, and there was the veranda out here which looks towards the city, which they had access to as well. So yes, it was home for the caretakers. So anything else, Daphne, that you'd like to add?
No, I think you've done very well, actually.
Yeah?
I just wanted to say that it's been a real privilege to live here and be a part of this community for 5 years.
Yep.
And seeing my grandkids born and coming here and playing on their birthdays, it was beautiful.
Yes, and Daphne shared and showed me some photos of birthday parties with family that came in that time that they were here, which looked fabulous, yeah. And imagine kids on the big stair, wouldn't that be fun to chase up and down? Then in 2000, so in 97 or 98, there was a conversation around, we're all getting a bit tired, that we don't have the strength of membership we had once, and funding is a bit of a problem. And the discussions were started with the City of Stirling, and the City of Stirling, as I understood it, said, look, where there's some state government moves which is going to take Maylands from Stirling and give it to Bayswater, it would be a travesty to transfer the old peninsula to the City of Stirling, wait until the City of Bayswater are in control of the area and then transfer it. So that's what did happen. So in 2000, the Old Peninsula Association, who was in the process of amalgamating with the Maylands Historical Society, donated the building by deed of gift to the City of Bayswater. So it's still owned today by the community through the City of Bayswater holding that ownership, and Dome is simply the tenant in 2 parts. So as part of this, the blue bit here is the parlour, which is just beyond here, which the association still has access to and uses every week for the Maylands Historical and Peninsula Association as a bit of a headquarters for storing stuff for these nights, and we have community access to the dining room for this sort of thing, along with a couple of other groups still use it. So here was, 1st of July was the transfer date technically, but it wasn't actually finalised till the 22nd of September. So this was just a couple of photos when the deed of gift was handed over to the association from the City of Bayswater when they took control of the building. And it continued under management of a community committee, which was some of the people that had been involved for a number of years, as well as the City of Bayswater. Till 2007, 2008, the City of Bayswater went out for expressions of interest as to what could the building be used for. And I don't really have the backstory on that. I'm waiting to find the person that can tell us the information about, well, what was the background to that? So, love to capture that. But yeah, so in September 2008, the City signed a 15-year lease with Dome Coffees Australia for the use of the City-owned and heritage-listed Peninsula Hotel as a cafe and brasserie and head office and community meeting venue. So there's sort of three components to it. This is the community space. There's the cafe brasserie, and then upstairs and this office here just behind this door is where Dome headquarters are for their whole operation. So they use this as their base for all of their operations. I just pinched that out of the annual report that we were lucky enough. I went into the City of Bayswater Library, probably 3 or 4 years ago, wasn't it, John? And said, we want to be able to scan some documents and what have you. And she said, oh, fantastic, Terry, I'm glad you've come in. Can you come and have a look at our storeroom? We've got all this stuff we'd like to get rid of. And I said, well, look, I won't do that right now. I'll come back with John and Roger and we'll have a look. And they had boxes and boxes and boxes of old reports and stuff that they no longer had use for and were ephemeral copies because they were duplicates of the original. So we managed to get some of these old annual reports and searching through them picked up some of these sort of details. So that was a bonus. I seem to have missed my slide where up the front I had, starting a conversation and capturing it, but have you got a story to tell? There's a few people that have come tonight that have got long associations with the Peninsula and around here. Have you got a story to tell? Do you want to share a couple of paragraphs or sentences? Maybe you've got some photos that you'd like to scan or take a photo of and send to us. Because really, it would be great to capture the story of the potential demolition, the saving, the community use. The community use function really, from what I can see, seems to be about 27 or maybe 30 years of use by community groups in this building under community management effectively. And it still astonishes me that, the brewery would go, oh yeah, and here's the title deeds, It just does astonish me. I don't know of another example in WA of something quite that significant. So, yeah, how do we preserve the story? Has anybody got a story they'd like to tell or something they know that we don't know? Yeah, come up here, Pam. We've got a microphone here which will capture on the video. Thank you. So this is Pam Gunn.
Hello. Yes, David got me involved because I belong to the folk dance group. And I thought it was towards the end of 1976 because it was the 70th birthday of the building. And again, rather strangely, the brewery said we could go into the courtyard and have a bit of a celebration event. And because I'd just moved into Maylands then, David said, oh, you live near here. Come over in the morning and we'll paint a few poles and tizzy it up a bit. And the folk dance group were going to do some dances. And I can't remember who else did what. So that's how I got involved. And for about 9 years I then was involved. But it was very interesting. I wasn't involved in all those negotiations, which is why I told you to get in touch with David. But we were trying to raise funds to buy the building from the brewery by having a big auction, but we weren't getting very far. What I also wanted to say about the damage that was done, or the things that were taken, the 2 stained glass windows that are out either side of in the foyer there, either side of the fireplace, had been removed and taken away by the brewery. And one was in Forestfield Tavern, which they still owned when they did decide to give us this building, and they gave us that window back. But the other one was in the Peninsula Tavern, behind its very small dance floor with a flashing light for a disco. And the tavern, by that stage the brewery didn't own the tavern. It had been the licence had been taken over by the licensee, and he owned it, and he wasn't going to give it back. And my memory was that he had been the son of the last licensee here in this pub and had grown up in this building, and because it had been gradually not being repaired very well, he didn't like the building either. So he wasn't, for a long while, he wasn't going to give us back the window. But I don't know, probably it was David convinced him eventually to give it back. So we were able to reinsert both windows. And the other thing that was a big problem was the skirting boards, which in quite a lot of the areas had just been, levered off the wall again, along with the surrounds of the fireplace. And they were broken more, so we couldn't just put them back. And we couldn't find, at the time, anyone who could make such deep skirting boards. So someone had the idea of the ones that hadn't been removed, to take impressions of them, and we had them made up in plaster, fiberglass, plaster, and then painted. And when they were first in, that would look fine, but pretty soon people bumped into them with things, and they had chips, and it wasn't suitable. I gather, after I was no longer involved, some years later, someone did find someone who could do the woodwork for the bigger skirting boards, so that was great. And our dance group danced here for quite a while, but it got a little small, and we only really stayed about 3 years, I think. When the Ethnic Music Centre started in North Perth, and they offered us to use the North Perth Hall, so we moved out. But I and David and some others were still involved on running the Peninsula Committee. So at various times we rotated roles. I think I was actually chairperson for a short while, and I was treasurer and a secretary and all this sort of thing, as you know, that sort of things in small groups. And I was the one that signed, when we got that first $25,000 via the Stirling Council, I signed a document to say we'll accept this on the grounds that we'll never, ever, ever ask for any more money.
Yes.
Fortunately, that somehow got lost, I gather, because it's had various grants over the years.
Yeah. Yes, and it's amused me when I see those sorts of agreements and saw that for here. That, well, yes, this is your last will and testament. You're only getting this sort of thing, never any more. But
yeah.
Yeah.
David or Pam, there's a big safe in the parlour, a ginormous. There was a story that was one of the reasons why they couldn't demolish the place, because there was a safe in there. Is that a true story? Or
I don't know anything about that. Do you, David?
So the safe in the parlour wasn't really the saviour of the building. No. So yes, there's been this sort of story that says, they can't demolish the building until the safe's been removed because it's got valuables in it. But it doesn't sound like it was really that important.
No, don't remember.
Yep.
We did have to pay, although they gave us the building, the only thing we had to do, they said we had to pay for the rediverting the sewage or the water supply, so it was separate from the tavern.
Yep.
And fortunately, in our attempt to raise money to eventually buy the building, we did have enough money to do that. So we were able to carry on.
Great. Thanks,
Right,
Pam.
thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Avril.
I used to come here with the Western Australian Card Collectors Society and was always interested in the kitchen. They had 5 different sorts of stoves or ovens.
5 stoves in the kitchen.
Yep. Here.
Yeah.
And even just before Joan took over, there was still 5. Yeah. Yeah, wood stove, Kookaburra, gas stoves, various sorts, and then a modern stove.
Okay.
So the history of cooking in one room.
Yeah, so they had all of those old forms still in the kitchen.
Well,
Yeah.
I just remembered one of the lens who we heard about made that fire escape out the back.
Oh, okay, the steel one. Right. So,
Actually, the Lenzooks is quite an interesting story because he wasn't doing very well in those days. He wasn't selling much. And he owed money in terms of rent. And because he couldn't pay, he actually gave the association some sculptures and a painting that we still have today.
so yes, there's two. So there's two paintings. So outside the old police station, when you come down to have a look on a Wednesday or our once a month open on a weekend, you can see outside at the gate on a post is a biplane that Len constructed. Unfortunately, the tail has come away. His welding on the tail wasn't so good, so that is sitting on the shelf inside. But we do have up on the post part of Len's work, yes. So
on the inside we've got 2 of his paintings.
yeah, and I've tried to track down Len or Ron Gombok. Some of you may know Ron Gombok from Middle Swan, who's a great artist and who I've known since I worked up at Swan, City of Swan, when he was opening his gallery and what have you in Middle Swan. So got to know him in '82. I've been trying to track him down and pin him down because he's told me many a good story about his time with Len in the building here, creating and doing things at the time. So has anybody else got anything they'd like to share or questions?
Yeah. Upstairs, what's the ceilings like? Because when I used to get in the roof to get the pigeons,
Yeah.
it was pretty well caked with pigeon dirt, you know.
Yes.
And I never ever got around to turning the power off before it got in on. But up the top behind the dome was a little doorway. And that used to be always open for the birds to fly in and out.
Yep.
And I used to go in there and I only lived 3 houses up the street here.
Okay. And sorry, what's your name?
Ken Ashworth.
Ken Ashworth. So you used to get your pigeons out of the roof here?
Out the roof here.
Wow.
Yeah, and even the dome, you could get into the dome too, and you could go around to the nest.
Yep.
Take a little torch around.
Find them.
Get them.
Recover 'em.
About 16, 15.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm
Yes.
only 4 now, so...
Yeah.
But, yeah, I often wonder if it's all fallen in or not up there. 'Cause
Yeah, look, I don't know. I know that I've read stories. Daphne.
My hubby went up there and cleared out a lot of kitchen.
Okay.
Yeah, and he went around there and everything, but he said there was nothing untoward, so he just shut up and left it. So,
Yeah, yep.
yeah,
So yes, I've heard that story, and I know Daphne told me it recently about, yes, well, there was mountains of pigeon poo that was just cleaned out, and then it was blocked off so they couldn't get access.
I used to climb up the big pipe at the back.
Oh, okay.
And one day I was ready to come down, and when they had the big gardens there, I had the lawnmower man turned up, and I had to wait for him to finish mowing all the lawn.
Didn't want to get caught in the act. Sorry, Daphne.
I was going to say, does anyone know of the dumbwaiter that went up?
Yes, so there is a dumbwaiter that goes upstairs in the building. So,
It was still working when we were there.
yep, so back in the late 1996, 97, yeah. So I don't know whether the dumbwaiter still works, but I've seen quite a few stories that talk about the dumbwaiter, and it always seems amusing these days to talk about dumb waiters. It's like, you can't say that. But it was actually the thing. It was the lift for the food and drinks to go between the floors, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because that was where the postcard was, the bottom.
Oh, a bottle shop.
That was where the old dining room was.
Oh, okay.
For the people who were living
Residents,
here.
yep, yes. So yes, no, these, yeah, if the walls could talk, imagine what we could learn from beyond, you know, saving the hotel back in the 70s. And, you know, I think there's some really fascinating stories, and there's enough people left at the moment that were involved or lived in the area and have got stories. It would be great to be able to capture those somehow for the future so that we can record it for future generations and also to have in our libraries. Yeah. So anybody else got any other questions, or we'll just stop and we can have a mingle and... Yes?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
How did the dome end up being there? And
Look,
do they pay rent?
So Dome entered into a rental arrangement with the City of Bayswater back in 2008, and my understanding is they've got a 15-year lease with an opportunity to add another 10. I don't know what the terms of the lease were or are, but yes, when they first moved in, the lease was geared on the basis that what Dome do with a lot of buildings is they move into them and spend a lot of money to recover the building so that they can make it functioning. So my understanding is that the lease was almost no input from them to the city in the early days, but I don't know how that changed as the lease has progressed. Sorry, Sue.
We know a little bit of the background as to why Dome ended up here through Terry Devereux, who used to be associated with Maylands Historical, and he was a councillor at the time.
So yes, when the deed was signed, Terry Gaunt was the councillor.
He spoke, so there was talk, they were in talks with Dome about having a cafe here, and then Terry had this very bright idea that given Dome's propensity to really like old buildings, he said, well, why would you consider having this as your headquarters? And Dome were actually they became really, really interested in that idea. They weren't interested in having it just as a cafe, because they didn't think they'd get enough business this side of the track. But with the whole package of it being their headquarters as well, then they were interested. And that's my understanding of why they decided to.
I presume they pay some money.
Yes, look, we're not privy to the lease. You know, it's commercial in confidence. Got it.
They're making lots of money, aren't
But they did have to do a lot of work on the place. So I think because they had to do a lot of work on the place initially, I would imagine that they got a very good...
Yes, and I know currently another local government who's negotiating for one of their historic and heritage buildings to be taken over by a commercial entity where the terms aren't public, and I'm not privy to those, but I know I've been told that, well, yeah, you're dreaming if you think you make money out of running these sort of buildings as a premise, and they are signing a contract where somebody will move in and take over a historic building and maintain it so it's there forever, rather than, you know, neglect by decay. You know, how many buildings have we seen around? Midland is one I'm very familiar with. You know, pubs in Midland, it was neglect by decay, fill them with boxes of old records and hope somebody moves in and lights a fire and it burns down, you know. So, sorry, I've got somebody over here that...
I was at the council meeting that discussed, like, the Bayswater Council, about whether Dome should take over or not, or who could. A lot of people turned up. And everyone on the other side, businesses were complaining about where they want to park, because they pay for the parking out there, and I think everyone comes here, you have enough parking, and they park at their place over there, and it's a bit of controversy. But I think it was like, I don't know if I remember correctly, but like they paid $1. And, but then they had to, like you said, like $1 million or something was assigned.
Yeah, because there was some air conditioning and things like that that had to be done when they moved in, as well as other things. So, yeah, so, I mean, the thing for me is it's about how do we make sure it's preserved for the future. It ran as a community building for 30 years. Maybe one day a component of the building could go back to the community, who knows? But certainly currently the city's got at least, and, you know, that was in that annual report, which I'd never known the detail until I was thumbing through this pile of old annual reports and found this one. It's like, oh, here's a picture of of the Peninsula Hotel. Oh, and here's when they signed a 15-year lease. So
runs out this year, does it not?
yeah, so the 15 years runs out this year, but they've got an option in the lease to renew for another 10.
We don't know.
So yeah, I don't know. I would imagine that's in negotiation, perhaps.
Did anybody famous stay here?
Yeah, well, if only we knew. No, I don't know. I haven't heard any stories about famous people staying here, no. You just never know, though, do you? Make us a story and send it in. Anyway, look, we're probably pressed for time. We've got a few of these, there's a few of these brochures up here, which gives a little bit of the background, 1906 to 1996, and who was in the building in 1996. Thank you to our speakers and for coming along tonight, and thank you to everybody for coming along.
That's great. Some of the things which are really distressing is that picture you saw of the state of this floor when it was first done, and the quality of the woodwork. I mean, the woodwork is quite astonishing, the quality of what they do. And last November we had a series of walks, and some of you may have seen the Heritage Buildings walk, which ended up here. And thankfully at that time they actually propped open the door of reception so people could actually go in there. Anyone who's interested, we'll raise this blind afterwards. You can see up the stairs. Unfortunately, as it's dark, you can't see the stained glass window. We can open the front door. You can go in there. You can see those swastika things, like the swastika light, which are still the tiles are in there. The quality of the carving on the doors and the surrounds is still there, isn't it? In the
Yes.
So you can go in and see the lobby. You can't go into here, of course, but you can see through there into the reception area, and you can see our room. So we'll open up that door for you afterwards. I think the other thing that struck me was this protesting Maylands. We had a talk last year which John had put together the stuff about, you remember those of you who were here, about the brickwork lakes, the water land that was then going to be filled in with low cost housing, and they fought for that to preserve the water, to preserve the lakes. And I like the idea that community activism in Maylands, you know, the revolting people of Maylands, the communists and all the others. So thank you very much indeed. Terry, thanks for that.
Thanks, Terry.